welcome everyone. My name is Ray Dorsey. My pleasure to be here with Bakul Patel. Regulation of machine learning software, approval of digital therapeutics, and use of digital endpoints in clinical trials. These are just some of the topics that keeps Bakul up at night. Mr. Bakul Patel, who has served at the FDA for the past 12 years, is currently the Director of Digital Health at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. In addition to his role at the FDA, Mr. Patel has chaired the International Medical Device Regulators Forum Committee on Software as a Medical Device since its inception in 2013. An electrical engineer by training, Mr. Patel completed his undergraduate degree at Karnataka University in India, his master's in electrical systems engineering at the University of Regina in Canada, and his MBA at the Johns Hopkins Carey School of Business. We are delighted to welcome one of the leading thinkers on the regulation of digital devices, Mr. Bakul Patel, to our symposium on the future of Parkinson's clinical trials. Bakul, welcome.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you for those kind introductions.
So Bakul, we first met each other, I think in 2015, shortly after Apple released ResearchKit, an open source platform for enabling smartphones to be tools to conduct health research. What were your thoughts on that development?
Frankly speaking, I think it was revolutionary in terms of being able to think about studies in terms of all comers and trying to bring people together and take part in this social development, so to speak, I would say, that sort of leads to science. And it was a really exciting sort of point in time that we could say, lead us to where we are today to have this conversation.
So you were at the FDA at the time. All of a sudden, one of the world's largest tech companies, Apple, announces it's going to be doing medical research. Did you have any concerns?
Actually, I would say I had mixed feelings. I would say not concerns. I would not necessarily put it as concerns. I mean, the thought in my mind at that time was like, if these people, these tech companies who have really wrong reach to patients, and I think it has an opportunity for reaching patients that we normally would not reach with medtech and the care that we provide. So I think that was sort of the excitement. At the same time, I was curious to see how they would supplement their knowledge of reaching the consumers and turning the consumers as their customers to patients as their customers. And obviously you need to sort of bring that sort of perspective to the fold. And I was very curious at that time, like how that would happen. I had really little doubt in how they could do it, whether they could do it or not, but more of curiosity in how they would do it.
So there were 5 initial apps released at that time, one for asthma, breast cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and we were fortunate to be part of the one for Parkinson's disease, along with our colleagues at Sage Bionetworks and Dr. Max Little from Birmingham University. These tools and other platforms, including now on Android, have enrolled millions of individuals in research studies, many of whom likely would never have been able to participate in research otherwise. In your mind, what have been their successes?
I would say the democratization of enrolling people into studies was, to me, is a big success. I think I would say that reaching out and being able to, I forget the numbers, like 10,000 people in like two-month time frame were enrolled into the studies is phenomenal. Never heard about it, right, in traditional trials. And then you start hearing sort of, okay, now the hard work begins in terms of where and how we take that information and those people that are willingly participating into that. So I think that's success. It also opened up the common man's sort of look into participating into these studies, which would probably be different if that was not happening.
We need that kind of enrollment for the COVID vaccine trials.
Yes, it's very different now, isn't it?
What are the limitations of these studies that are being conducted over smartphones and digital devices?
Well, I think, at that point, and maybe I've evolved in thinking about this, and people have started thinking about what are the pluses and minuses, and I feel like access to those subjects and participants is great. At the same time, you are going to have some unsupervised enrollment. into the studies, which means that you'll have to be really clear in sort of your endpoints that you're going to come up with to sort of see some insights. And to some extent, you may not be you may not have full control over your design of your study, but there may be some observational like retrospective design could be applied to that. So I felt like those were some of the things that people sort of worked through, and I hope they continue to work through, because this is probably an opportunity as more and more people get engaged in their health.
So these digital tools have been widely used to measure health in observational studies, but their adoption as digital outpoints or outcome measures in clinical trials has been more limited. Why is that?
Good question, Ray. I'm not sure I know the answer to why is that, but I feel like, and maybe we'll just talk this out, and I feel like there's a gap between sort of acceptance of those endpoints versus what the endpoints are actually showing. I feel like some of those endpoints are not as, let's just say, for lack of a better word, pristine, like you would normally see in prospective studies. And how do you sort of bring that on non-pristineness and sort of have some confidence around those endpoints? I think that's what's one of the things I feel could be a factor. And plus, it's novel. I think it's also, when we're looking at things that are not normally either observed by provider or a PI in a study, but you're now relying on a technology sort of to do those things that are outside of the visibility of the PI. It becomes, or a researcher, it becomes sort of a little bit of unknownness that needs to go with that data that's collected. And I feel like once we close those gaps between the data integrity, the sort of where that information is coming from, how it's coming from, and it's not muddled with noise, with the scientific community accepting sort of the non-pristineness, and then hopefully, composite of that would probably drive toward a pristine sort of endpoint, is kind of what I feel like we still need some work, and I think we probably need to sort of work towards that.
Just a reminder to our listeners that you can be able to ask questions of Bakul as well. We're going to save plenty of time to do that, so just put that in the chat. You mentioned pristine endpoints. So what does the FDA want to see to be comfortable with the use of a digital measure as an endpoint in a clinical trial?
Well, I would be remiss if I say I speak for the whole FDA, but it's I would say that I would tell you my opinion, what I've heard in conversations, and I would say that I think people, back to the previous question you were asking, Ray, is, people do wonder when somebody presents a step count data, what's the sort of the relevance of that to that endpoint? And people also wonder, sort of, is it really the people's step, or is it something else? And I think those are the questions that people are looking for, to make sure that when step equals activity and activity equals energy, what does that really mean? And eventually, does that really relate to a sort of the function of the subject? And those questions come up all the time for us. Part two of that question has always been how accurate these things are, and does the study require that accuracy or not? And sometimes those becomes challenging, because especially when you start using consumer wearable devices, you don't have a lot of that accuracy information off the top of the tip of your hand, and it becomes sort of a question, scientific curiosity question, how much to rely on it, how much not to rely on it.
Can you give us an example of a digital measure that you think is ready for use as a primary endpoint?
Interesting. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I think I would venture a guess that it's not going to be one particular measure that's going to be a primary endpoint. I would say, at least at this point, the way I've seen things evolve, it would be more than one measure that will drive towards an endpoint. Is kind of where I'm seeing things go. And I'll tell you the fact. Just an example. and you and I have talked about this, like when somebody watches gait for a person and you look at some non-verbal and footsteps sort of measurements that are maybe very cognitive for a person, but when your measurement device is just measuring, up and down motion and sort of the steps, yeah, what else needs to be complemented to that particular measurement to get to the same gait sort of example that we were talking about. So I feel like we're still not completely contextualizing the measurement that we're seeing from these variables. And I think when we start doing that, I feel like we'll probably get there.
So let's take step count. So could you see number of steps per day being an endpoint in a clinical trial?
I think it could be it depends, right? I think it goes to the point that is number of steps per day equals activity, equals improvement in health, or difference in health. Is that indicative? And I think that the last connection is something that I think is still unclear for a lot of people, especially when we start changing measurement device to measurement device, and the variability between those matters for people. I guess we talk about this a lot in the group that I work with, and we talk about, is it about the activity on off, or is it the steps count on off? And is the number of steps that matter, or does it matter that there's an activity happening for a person that's wearing this particular device or not? And when you think about that activity, is the level of activity matter, or is it just an indication of activity matters that contributes to the endpoint? And I'm not sure how the usages are going on right now and how people are using it in studies, but that would be sort of a way to think about it.
So as you likely know, the FDA has recently accepted moderate to vigorous physical activity as a primary endpoint in clinical trials for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. The European Medicines Agency has done similarly for gait velocity for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Do you think we're going to see more of these endpoints?
I think so. I think we'll start seeing more of these sort of come up as people get comfortable into making those clinical associations. I think the last bit of that clinical association is something that we all have to get comfortable with. The reviewers have to get comfortable with the data associated with that. Needs to be something that we can all rely on and say, it doesn't really matter which measurement tool you're using, but this is what really matters, and we can get there. So I believe that's where we're heading.
Is COVID-19 going to make us get there faster?
COVID-19 is an interesting situation. I think COVID-19, if nothing else, it talks about remoteness first and less touch, right? I mean, that's sort of a fundamental thing that sort of happened with COVID-19, which sort of accelerates this concept of decentralized trial to some degree, actually a lot of degree, and then thinking about how do we start looking seriously at this technology that's brought by the subjects on their own, or being provided, that's consumer oriented, that's less expensive, and what can be relied on. So I believe COVID-19 is going to accelerate some of this for sure. Trials, including sort of remoteness of the trials, is going to become much more prevalent.
In some cases, these digital endpoints might not have been studied or evaluated as rigorously as people would have liked. COVID-19 is going to prevent many traditional assessments from actually just being done. Does that mean that the FDA might be more willing to accept endpoints that haven't been studied as rigorously in the past, primarily because they're now feasible to be done in the present?
Interesting. I don't know whether I can make a choice with it right now. I mean, ideally, FDA's sort of process includes to make sure that the studies, actually the validation has to be more rigorous. And I think the level of rigor and comfortableness and making sure that this uncertainties are sort of answered is going to be the key questions we'll be looking for. I can tell you that it's going to be interesting as we start moving towards this remote sort of collection of information. The level of rigor and how does that change in validation I think there's going to be some assumption, there's going to be some standardization that would need to come from the consumer wearables industry, as well as making sure that people start off with something known, and that will probably drive towards what you're just hinting at.
Jen Goldstack and her colleagues at the Digital Medicine Society have a library of digital endpoints, freely accessible, that includes 129 unique digital endpoints from 41 sponsors. 41 of these 129 are listed as primary endpoints. These include number of coughs per hour, average total nighttime sleep, time in a non-sedentary position, gait speed, and number of periodic limb movements. What are your thoughts on some of those endpoints?
I think they're very promising. I think sleep is a very interesting thing that people that's actually best measured when you're at home and not in a controlled setting. So you can actually get the real patterns, right? I think all of those, to me, people have been sort of trying to study gait for the longest time, even in the very early days when we met and we talked about it. I think that was one of the key things that sort of led to this measurement. So my personal opinion is I think it's going to get better in terms of validity. It's going to get better in terms of understanding sort of the clinical association with that and filling out the context vacuum around those particular measurements.
A common theme across all of those is that they all seem to have enormous face validity. All else being equal, you'd rather not cough. All else being equal, you'd rather not have your sleep interrupted. All else being equal, you'd rather be more active. Is that a huge point for the FDA?
Interesting. I hadn't thought about it from that angle, but that's an interesting perspective, Ray. Yeah, non-invasiveness, right? I think you're getting at to the subjects themselves. It actually does matter. I think as you start understanding more closely to where people are in the normal state, it actually will probably start making a difference. And I think we'll have to get better. I think when I say we, I think FDA has to get better at understanding those sort of nuances as we move forward.
A little bit more on these endpoints. It also seems some of these endpoints, number of steps per day or gait speed, could be applicable across a wide variety of conditions. So activity, number of steps per day could be useful in a study in congestive heart failure, could be useful in a study of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. It could be useful in a study of Parkinson's disease or ALS. Your thoughts?
I think you're right. I think these tools, once you contextualize it right, you probably will be able to use it in other studies. So there are some economies of scale that can happen in this area. And I think that's one of the exciting things about this. There's the cost of this measurement devices, to sort of the cross applicability in other areas, which is probably maybe not at the same level of contribution to those endpoints, but maybe at least not starting from ground zero is kind of what I'm hoping that we'll get to.
Going to turn switch gears a little bit here and talk about the software pre-certification program. You were one of the architects of the FDA's software pre-certification program, which has largely been praised. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I can tell you, it's been a journey. It was a brainchild that came out of conversation between me and my boss, and we started this journey in 2017, and 2018 we started building what this should look like. We started at a very high level of what if we start understanding the people who are making this product, and then starting to understand how the products are being made. So 2018 we said, let's build what this looks like. 19 we put out a framework, and then in 19 we started exploring how we could implement, if we were to implement it. And so we're looking at how to understand the nuances of it. So when COVID sort of happened earlier this year, we are moving to a place where we're looking at how do we objectively start looking at an organizational performance, and then looking at what's the real world performance data that can be collected from these digital health tools that are medical devices. And when you take those two pieces of information, can we add it to our calculus and say, A plus B, which is the company's information, the product's information in the field, along with the product's initial going to market information, can we add that to become can provide us reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. Now, this sort of highlights this whole total product lifecycle I've been talking about. So this year we are working much harder towards understanding, objective measures from all those different areas, from all the three aspects, and trying to come up with a system that can give us the sort of more assurance on the product and the system itself that's sort of maintaining it. We are going to put out an update really soon. In the next few days, you will probably see an update of what we have learned over the last year and a half, and you'll start seeing some next steps that evolve from there. We're still very much in the test, build, test, and iterate phase where we're trying to build a program. As you can imagine, such a big program to build from scratch.
Can you tell us a little bit how regulating software is different or perhaps more difficult than regulating devices or drugs?
Yeah, I mean, one of the key aspects of software is it can be built really fast by almost anybody because tools are becoming much more easier. And then the second aspect of software and the methodologies that are used is they end up iterating on smaller increments. So you have this slow growth of functionality over time that sort of can lead a software from indicated for X to indicated for Y. And I think from a regulatory perspective, that raises challenge because our regulations are bounded by the indications of use and intentions of the manufacturer. So we have a prescribed box, so to speak, or prescribed boundary, and with software you can see this evolving into non-static way of going from one indication to another indication. Just like what today I can apply certain technologies or measurement tools for one disease or condition, but now I have to do it for something. I can do it for something else. So those are the kind of challenges we face. The part two of the challenge is because modifications happen all the time with software, either based on user feedback or based on sort of learnings in the field, especially in machine learning and adaptive algorithms, you can start thinking about that. Today's system requires people, manufacturers or developers to come back to FDA to get a clearance if there are safety or risk concerns. Not everything, but when it sort of trips the risk concerns or safety concerns. And we would want that. And that sort of puts a burden on FDA as well as on industry as we start sort of approving every change that is risky. But what we are thinking about is like what can be done in this space where other things can satisfy the need for us to look at the product changes. So that's kind of what we're thinking, and it's sort of wrapped into this whole concept of iteration and rapidly evolving.
Because these products are not static but are dynamic, the FDA's approach has focused more on approving companies than on improving the software. Why?
Well, so if you take a step back and look at it, right? So if we understand sort of or have confidence in the organization and the mechanics of the organization that's making the product, we start off with a different level of assurance to begin with for any product that's sort of being built by that company. Now, again, sort of start thinking about next steps, right? So you can think about, I know this organization is capable of doing X in really good way. It has all the capabilities and it has really good sort of clinical perspective on, let's just pick mental health or Parkinson's for that matter, and say, okay, this company is really good. Now, if that same company would want to do something in cardiology, we would be wondering whether they can still do it or not. So that, I think at that point in time, that seems like a major change. But for everything in that space that they have all the capabilities of doing in Parkinson's space, we would have higher confidence in the products made by that company. And for certain types of indications, we would say that's okay for a product to go straight to market with the promise of reporting back real world evidence or real world performance of the product beyond evidence, right? And for higher risk, like if it's really invasive or it's really going to make some life or death situations or really problematic if it doesn't work properly, we would spend time reviewing that product to make sure that the safety concerns are addressed and the benefits are weighed in with the effectiveness of the product itself. So I feel like looking at the company can give us a better starting point than not having anything about it.
So this is almost sounds like it's akin to approving Pfizer or Medtronic as entities rather than Lipitor or a deep brain stimulator. Is that right?
Yeah. So you would. So one thing to sort of make sure that we get across to people, right, is it's not just about one or the other. It's the combination of the company plus the product and the type of product they're making. So it's beyond just one or the other. I think a Medtronic, we are not think about one large corporation to sort of be certified or to be looked at in terms of organization excellence. We're thinking about, where can we sort of draw the boundaries within that organization to say that unit, that business unit, or that organization structure will give us confidence in building certain types of products that will allow them to modify quickly and help because they have all the risk management structures in place and proven. And we know certain types of products don't need to be looked at while we're looking at some other products.
Does this favor larger companies over smaller ones?
Actually, it's on the contrary. It could. I mean, if the way we are thinking about this is in a very objective KPI and measures sort of way, it might be better. It might actually favor smaller companies better because you're not having too many handshakes between departments. Where you can imagine a large organization with multiple departments can have multiple. Being in large corporate, I know that could be silos, that could be sort of handoffs that can be missed, etc. Could potentially cause delays, or it could potentially cause issues. Whereas a smaller company, the communication channels between departments and organizational units are much quicker, faster, more nimble to react to some of the issues that could happen in the field, especially in the space of software. So I feel like there's going to be a balance between what a large company has for structure, whereas the smaller companies, they may have less of a structure but better efficiency in their structure. Would probably be helpful.
Can you give some examples of some devices that software that has been approved by the FDA under this program?
So we haven't. So this program is not live. I just want to make sure that we're clear about that. We are still in the build process of the program, right? So like I said earlier, we are still building, testing, iterating. What we are doing is, while products are going through our regular processes, we are trying to, in the shadow of that, trying to understand what could we do and experiment without actually trying to interfere or sort of stop the current review process. We're trying to build a system that could be better, can address some of the challenges in the space by actually not being in the main path. So that's kind of what we're doing. So we really don't have any products going through the process. What we do have is we have tried a few products, retrospectively tried a few products to try this path out.
We're going to get questions from our audience in a second, so please put them in. We'll take them after the last quick topic. Digital therapeutics. Anything you want to say about digital therapeutics?
I think it's a really interesting and evolving and very promising field, at least personally, I would say, because of some of the recent advances that's been made, like game-based as well as cognitive behavioral therapy, and a much more interesting sort of therapeutic area that sort of probably has not been addressed in other ways. And also, for me, it is non-invasive, so that actually makes it even better from a use and safety perspective. So I'm intrigued how this field starts becoming more evidence-based and start providing a little bit more assurance to not just the regulators, but also the users in the scientific community.
Our first question is from Rini Winter Evans. We have people who have Parkinson's disease, people who are at risk, pharma companies, researchers. She asks, and I'll paraphrase, what do you think about digital measures being used to assess people with prodromal Parkinson's disease or people with carry a genetic factor that puts them at risk for developing disease, but do not yet have any external symptoms, at least as typically thought about?
I think that's a really interesting case, and I hope these digital diagnostics will actually do that. And so that leads to this question about it's a novel indication, which I think FDA would welcome that very much, and we would love to work with. I mean, I was just speaking to the office director this morning, and his message to me was, we'd love to sort of work with people who are exploring these things and be excited to partner to understand what the studies would look like, that we can get to a place that we can detect non-symptomatic patients.
Mary Beth Arzak asks, can you discuss how you will evaluate the use of artificial intelligence to evaluate large amounts of data and make predictive suggestions?
Yeah, so I think data science and machine learning is a very important topic, very near and dear to my heart. I think we put out a paper, as you guys all know, last year. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's a proposal about a framework, how we would move forward. And it sort of touches upon the pre-certification concept I was mentioning earlier. Basically is, if we understand what a machine is trained with, what data sets are trained with, what it's validated with, and if we have a sense of sort of the demographic of the training set, demographic of the validation set, to know how much to be relied upon in prediction is going to be an interesting sort of concept that we are working through. And we do, just to be clear, I think we do have people who have come to us in different areas, maybe less in the prediction area, but more in sort of diagnostic area, in imaging, that we have used machine learning algorithms to be cleared or approved by FDA.
I'm going to again ask my listeners to put their questions. You don't often get Bakul Patel, one of the leaders in digital health at FDA. He's been there 12 years. He has lots of great ideas and lots of great answers. I lost my question. Ann McAllister asks, how is the agency soliciting or receiving reports of issues with digital products from patients and users? Does it rely on traditional AE reporting, or how are you approaching this for digital devices?
So I think great question. I think right now we are still having the AE reports come to us. I mean, we do have MDR reports as well. What we're asking people to do in the pre-certification program is instrument their products so they can get reports and make it easier for patients to reach out and report back to the companies. I think that's one of the things we are trying to push towards, where we can not only get issues, but also get benefits that patients are seeing. So there's a balance between this benefit/risk that we would ask people to sort of include into their software programs and their digital health technologies, because connectivity is key here, and you're connecting with the patients. Our rationale is might as well take advantage of that connection so patients can really get access to or provide that information while they're using.
Kartik Shaw asks, if software is not embedded in a mobile device, but it's an app on a mobile device communicating with the medical device using Bluetooth or wireless, will it have the same rigor of FDA approval for software?
Very, very interesting question. First of all, I think if I were to unpack that question a little bit, I think Kartik is probably asking the question about if there is a mobile app and if it's communicating with a medical device, will that be a same rigor? I think it depends on sort of what this mobile app is doing. So if you're controlling a medical device, I'll just use an example. You're controlling an infusion pump for that matter, or a diabetic infusion pump, insulin infusion pump. I think we would ask for assurance that control mobile app actually performs and is not going to harm the patient. So there's all kinds of safety information you can think about. When you're just getting information from such pumps to display it, to the user, I think that requires a different level of touch. So even though we do regulate these different types of apps, it depends on sort of the risk and risk profile and like what the functionality of the product itself is.
Our friend Dr. Kevin Biglin asked, how can digital measures be used in drug development to inform and support labeling claims?
Great question. I would say digital tools, interesting perspective, I would say. I think some of the digital tools in that can improve labeling claims, you can think about, and the simplest example that comes to my mind right now is like medication compliance for patients. If you start thinking about software and apps that are going to inform patients to remind them to take medication that will increase the compliance and in result increase some effectiveness of the drug, I think that could start getting into this place where it would be reviewed by FDA reviewers to see if it actually does improve compliance and it does actually improve effectiveness of the drug or efficacy of the drug.
How about if it's being used to assess sleep, for example, and you have a new device that says that it decreases the number of sleep interruptions? Could that inform the label?
Well, if it's used, so I think we have to take, so maybe I'm not getting a full example of, right? I'm trying to think about how do you connect a sleep measurement with a drug? And I think if the dosage is supposed to be modified with a sleep measurement, then you can get into this world of companion sort of therapeutic or companion diagnostics for that matter, right? Just like a companion IVD diagnostic exists, you have to diagnose something, and then based on the diagnosis, this is the dose you're going to get. I think once you start setting that up, I think there's potentially an opportunity for individualized dosing or number of sleep interruptions based dosing, etc. And that could start getting into the efficacy of the drug itself or the therapeutic.
And so if the drug, I think in this case, the thought would be you're going to use a wrist-worn device to measure number of sleep interruptions, and you're giving them a drug, and the drug's what they're looking to gain approval, and they want to know if you have a sleep-worn device, can the outcome measures from that sleep-worn device be used to influence what's included on the label?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility of doing that. But again, how much are you going to rely, how much of that information from the sleep wearable that you're using to inform the dosing and or claiming efficacy of the drug itself will depend on what path you take, right?
A more technical question for an electrical engineer. Jeremiah Jones asked, how are you thinking about the risk of model drift over time for AI health products?
So being a very technical question there, I would say, just like any other drift, I think you have to calibrate, and then self-calibration will lead to sort of avoiding drift. Right? So I think models are exactly that. I think you have to monitor and observe where the drift is. If the drift is happening, can you detect it? And then is there a way to sort of not let it drift or know where the drift is so we can correct sort of what then needs to happen. So there's other techniques in machine learning like perturbation and other things that people use and calibration that people use to sort of make sure the model does not drift away and doesn't get overtrained in one direction.
Does that suggest you'll need to have ongoing monitoring of some of these software?
Yeah, at the very minimum, I think we're expecting people who are making these should have ongoing monitoring for their own purposes. So that they know their products are continually being safe and continually being performing where they intended to perform, right? Because
do you see that as being as a requirement of approval, is that there is ongoing monitoring?
So that's the proposal we put on the table. I think we said, and the pre-cert program exactly does the same thing. It's like on the real world performance part, if the manufacturer is unaware of where the performance is, it's going to create a disconnect between what was cleared when it went to market to what it is today in this particular use. And we are saying that, one, it's easy to do in the world of digital health and software. Two, I think because of the inherent nature of making sure that the model, the software, and the algorithm is within bounds of what was intended, I think that basically means that you need to make sure that it is performing within the bounds. So you have to monitor.
Ranjit Kher says, you mentioned earlier that the FDA is looking to start a program to enable digital innovators to iterate faster if they've launched a similar solution in the past. What type of incremental innovations would fit into the scope of an accelerated approval? For example, if they improve their AI model, could that be something that could be quickly approved?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be the initial, so there's two ways to think about it. Like one is, what is the initial threshold for a particular indication that we need to sort of establish to get to market? That's like one threshold. And then the second question follow on is, what do you do for modification? So the answer is, we are trying to solve those two issues that will be in line with how products are developed and how we can get there faster. That does not mean we are going to take shortcuts on our scientific way of looking at safety and effectiveness and performance of the products. We would still look at, but we'll be looking at a very different and efficient ways to sort of evaluating that. We are exploring, and I think this is where the exploration is going on with the pre-cert program, that we will continue to sort of do that as we move forward. We have a program right now, a proposal on the table to use pre-specifications and change controls for the learning that happens in AI and machine learning algorithms that can be brought to FDA initially. And we would allow people to say, you can change these things within these parameters, and we understand how you're going to manage change within those parameters when they change it, and we would allow for that indication to happen. So we do have some measures right now that we can use, but we are not completely there in terms of full efficient sort of way of doing it.
Bakul, you've been at the FDA for 12 years. You've been involved in digital health for at least a half that time. What's next in the FDA's approach to digital health?
I feel like we've spent most of our time until now, at least till 2017, figuring out what is and what is not in terms of policy. What should FDA look at? What FDA would not look at? I think going forward, I would want to sort of look at how best, and based on the last question, how best we can more tailor our regulatory systems that is aligned with the technology speed, and sort of gives that answer that regulators and our stakeholders need is assurance. And so we're looking at ways to sort of make sure that the processes are nimble. That's number one. Number two, I think I'm looking at further collaborations and sort of driving synergies within FDA's different regulatory organizations for drugs, devices, biologics, other places. So we can drive this space sort of together so that it actually becomes useful for all different types of therapeutics and diagnostics that we have and we regulate.
And then last question, you said we couldn't ask any political questions, so I won't ask a political one, but I'll ask you, do you have any bold predictions on digital health or the FDA's activities for the next 6 to 12 months?
You'll start seeing some larger collaborations sort of happening, and we'll probably start seeing sort of the lean forward from FDA to start make sure that, you know, not only FDA is ready, but also the industry and the stakeholders and the scientific community is also enabled in the right way, empowered in the same way, that we could make this promise of digital health a reality together.
Any final words? Anything I didn't ask you that you want me to ask you?
No, I think you covered a good amount of topics, Ray. I think this has been phenomenal. I think the questions were really spot on and very deep dive. And I think there's much richer conversation than I normally have.
Well, but cool. Thank you very much for all your efforts to usher in digital health into a regulatory framework. We greatly appreciate your service in terms of improving the public's health. And we look forward to working with you in the future.
Same here. Thank you, Ray, so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.